Jack Thompson, it's an absolute pleasure to sit down with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're a major figure of Australian cinema, 50-year career. It's a hefty one at that. I have thoroughly enjoyed the past couple of weeks diving into your past with the films by going down to the Bellingen video store.
Wow.
I've been going into there and supporting our local video store
Cool.
and coming home with a pile like this of Jack Thompson films. And it's been remarkable. But of course, it got me thinking about where it all began. And your brother, Peter Thompson, he mentioned on an ABC story a few years back that when you were a little boy, you were already filled with storytelling and being cheeky, that it was innate. Can you take me back to that?
Well, that's true. Peter and I met at an establishment, a school at Narrabeen called Lake House, 1946, 45, 46, and the children there were children of broken homes, a lot of broken homes after the war, and autistic children. Autism hadn't been recognised, but there were autistic kids there. And there were also the sons and daughters of filmmakers and doctors and architects who were attracted to the sort of Montessori system that the two young teachers there were teaching with. And so we were encouraged to make puppets and do little puppet plays, and so from very early we were all encouraged to express ourselves in that way. And I was not yet living with Peter. We became best friends there, and then eventually I was adopted by his family. Yes. But before I went to live with him at the school, I would do sort of one-man plays for the rest of the kids.
For the rest of the kids.
Including serials. Like a form turned upside down became my canoe. Jack the Wonder Boy. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. Oh no, what's that ahead? It's a waterfall. Oh no. That's it. No, Jack, no, wait a minute. No, tomorrow.
Amazing. Episodes.
Serials.
Episodes.
Because I had seen, in those days, serials were commonly shown at the matinee movies.
Yes.
And there was always a serial.
But where did this spark come from? It was just innate?
Innate.
It was innate.
Totally innate.
Amazing.
Totally innate.
And you wanted to bring the joy out in others, in a way.
I just loved doing it, and I still love other people's involvement with it. When it's live, the involvement is quite tangible.
Yes.
But even with film, I recognise, the camera is the eye of everyone who sees this.
Interesting.
So,
thank you.
when I was doing Wake in Fright, Donald Pleasance was standing there listening to the young actors, myself and Gary Bond and Peter Whittle, standing there and talking about, in quite an excited way, the difference between stage and film and what is it. And Donald, who had already won awards, said nothing very much. And then he was called to the set. And as he went to the set, he sort of walked around behind me and he said, "Feed the camera, Jack." Feed the camera. And so I knew exactly what he was saying.
And that always stuck with you.
Because when you're on stage, you feed the audience. You don't turn away and say, "I think so and so." You direct it to the audience one way or another.
Yes.
And that camera is the audience.
Yes. I'd like to just go back to your adoptive family, because
Yes.
you were adopted by John Thompson, the ABC poet.
Yes.
And you said it was a household filled with intellect and love, and it was a bohemian type of household. Tell me, what was that like? Did your charisma come from being in that household as well?
Well, it was certainly fed by that household.
Yeah.
It was certainly fed by that. I recognised much later in my life, at the time I took it for granted. I didn't see it as bohemian or anything else. It was just Peter's parents and their house and their group of friends. But I recognised later, and particularly when we moved from Coleroy to Paddington, early days, John Thompson started the Paddington Society, and I recognised that the Thompsons in fact ran what the French call a salon, and they took care about inviting particular people to dinner and what shall we Pat was a wonderful cook, what shall we serve to them, and John, John, you can't have those two people there together.
It was an orchestration.
You can't have those two people there together. They won't get on with each other at all. And John would say, that'd be wonderful because they're both highly intelligent and we'll get some wonderful conversation out of that. And so the house...
That's kind of like a set already.
Yeah. She was very French salon.
Yeah.
And so the house was full of classical music mostly. And John Thompson had built his own hi-fi set. And old 78s. And wonderful conversations. Wonderful conversations. And it was a two-storied Paddington house. Stairs. We lived, our bedrooms were upstairs, and we'd be sent off to bed while the party went on with the adults downstairs. And Peter and I could get to just about the second step, where no one could see you, but you could see the people below and hear the conversation, so you were a part of what was going on. And it was red wine fueled intellectual excitement. It was great.
Amazing.
It was great. There was a continuous dialogue between Dean Barnett, John's very good friend, who had built his own harpsichord. He was responsible for, in those days, he was working with the PMG, responsible for modulating the broadcast of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra from the town hall. And he was a guest lecturer in non-Euclidean geometry. Hello. And he and John had this eternal dialogue. Every time they met, it would always resolve to the same thing: classicism, romanticism. And Dean would argue classicism and John would argue romanticism. They would bring poets and essays and one thing and another to prove their argument, their discussion.
What a rich environment you were exposed to. I'd like to ask about your name, because when you entered this family, you were John Hadley Payne originally.
Yeah.
And then Jack Thompson happened. Was there a reason that Jack, your first name, was changed as well? Was it because...
No, my first name was changed before I was adopted. My first name was changed at Lake House School because there were 4 Johns, including a girl who spelled her name Jon, John Lay, daughter of one of the famous Lay brothers of New Guinea, and a beauty. And that's where I was first called Jack. And I've never entirely understood why Jack is a diminutive for John, but it's interesting that in this day and age, people can be christened Tom, Jim, Joe. But in my day, nobody was christened with a name like that because they're diminutives of full names, William, Bill, James, Jim, and all of that. Yes. But I've never understood why Jack is a diminutive of John, same number of letters. But when my father was talking to me, he would address me as Johnny a lot of the time.
Oh wow, that stayed.
When he was sort of being intimate, he'd say, you understand, Johnny. For instance, when I went off to the cattle station at the age of 14, which you'll understand came out of that meeting with Bill Harney and being exposed to all of that recorded material from Arnhem Land. And Bill set up the job for me on Ellika station. And I can recall standing at the gate of the house in Good Hope Street, Bellingen, and about to get a cab out to the airport, because at 14 you only pay half fare and fly to Adelaide and then catch the train up to Alice Springs. And he said, "You don't want to be an actor, do you, Johnny?" He might have sort of said plumber. I was like, where did that come from? No, I was off to, my world of the adventure with the cattle station and people. But I had just played Henry V on the War Memorial Steps in Education Week, playing Henry V. Wow. And so this stream of acting from Lake House through was there all the time. All along. But I never wanted to be an actor. We didn't have an industry. There was no film or television. And if you wanted to make it as an actor, if you wanted to make it your life as an actor, you had to leave Australia. You went to London, or in a couple of rare cases, people went to America to work in film. But it was not considerable as something that you could do for a living.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And so John Thompson became this great inspiration towards your Indigenous activism and involvement. And last night on iView, I saw that he did this expedition to Arnhem Land, you described, and he came back with these recordings of the Yolngu people singing. What I would like to know, did you ever travel to Arnhem Land with John Thompson?
No.
No, you didn't.
No, I would love to have done. There you go. He asked me earlier one of the things that I would like to discuss with John were he's still here. One of them would be Arnhem Land and the Yolngu and the discussions that he must have had with Bill Harney that inspired his great sort of epic poem, The Conqueror. No, I didn't. It's amazing. When I did go up there later, before going to Garma, I was involved with a documentary in Kakadu, and the legendary Bill Nagy, who was responsible for the dreaming at Ubiri Rock, had been persuaded to go back to his dreaming and his responsibilities with his people by Bill Harney, because he had been working on a lugger. And when I met Bill, as an old man, he said, "Yes, I knew your father, I met your father." And he said, "I have some boys, I'd love them to be here." And he said, "One of your boys is going to come here." And he told me that. Wow. And that's all part of that. That esoteric association with that indigenous civilization that we ignore.
Yes, wow, fascinating. You always seem to play strong male characters in your films, from Clancy from The Man from Snowy River, Breaker Morant, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, Sunday Too Far Away, so on and so on. How are you different in your life, if at all? Were you always the same on and off the screen?
No.
No.
No. Ask my wife. No.
I'm curious.
No. Very, no. Acting is losing you. You have to disappear for acting to be a success.
But the authenticity just...
You become this other person in this other environment, this milieu. What makes them dance? Why would they say that?
Yes.
And that becomes you doing it.
But the strong Aussie male that you represented, you didn't identify with that?
No, no. It's the sort of leading man syndrome, really.
Yes.
The classic leading man in film and stage is, chap. And in this early Australian cinema, there were not a lot of actors who had worked mostly stage, who had a background of working with working men in a working man environment.
Yeah.
And I'd been a rural labourer and worked in shearing sheds. And
that's what felt so authentic.
yeah, all I have to do is, yeah, I know how we do this, and I know how they behave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think's happened to our Aussie male now in cinema? You know, where are we at now? Because it feels, maybe it's my ignorance, but it feels what you represented is not, it's not there as much now. I'm not sure.
I would agree with you, El, but that I think has to do with a sort of a fashion.
It's interesting, there was this interview with you in 1998 where you say the Aussie male is confronted with the duality of being completely fierce but tender at the same time. And it's, you have to choose one or the other, but that's not the answer. The answer is both. And in you know, in the whole is the truth. And I thought, that's not Aussie male, that's all men. You know?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That's important.
Yes, yes. Well, that's what you're asked to play.
Yes.
All men. Whatever character you play, you're playing all men. You're playing men because you are a man. You're playing all men because that's what drama is about.
Yes.
Each character represents the human condition.
Yes.
And you bring your own, I hope, modest understanding of the human condition to bringing that to life.
Yes.
And I think that you have to make a judgment about what it is you're going to bring to life.
You did it so beautifully, the fierceness and the care and the compassion blended together. I think that was your greatest essence. It was amazing.
That's delightful, so I'm glad.
I'd like to bring us to where we are now. We're on the mid-north coast and you've been here a long time.
1970.
It's a long time. Tell me about your connection to that initial land up in Dorrigo and how you decided to settle there.
Wow. A friend of ours was hitching in the days when young people hitchhiked. And he was hitching up to see his parents in Brisbane, and he was picked up by a young couple, a young man, a young woman, just south of Coffs Harbour, and it was getting dark, and they were driving to Woolgoolga, right here, and they said, you shouldn't be out there on the road at night. You can come and stay at our place overnight. Long story short, he stayed a couple of months, fell in love with the girl, and when he came back home to Sydney, he came and saw me and he said, you know that conversation we had about what would you really like to do now that you've sort of started as an actor? I'd like to have just a little farm somewhere, because I know from my own background that I could run a little farm, put the roof over my head and the food in my mouth, and that could be a base for me. And he said, well, you also said that you would never be able to afford it on an Australian actor's wage, and I think I've just found where you might be able to. And so from there on in, I came up on every weekend I could. We drove up from Sydney on Saturday, and I saw properties on Sunday, and then drove back on Sunday night, and started work again on Monday. And eventually we were taken, there is this property, he said, but it might be a bit too far out of town for you. I said, I work in the Northern Territory, nothing's too far out of town. And so he drove me up to this little property at the end of the valley, the Bobo Valley, and an old wooden cottage there that had been used to store super in, and the cows had been sleeping on the veranda, and but it was a soldier settler cottage that had been built in 1919, and it was ideal for me. It was the most extraordinary, beautiful place. Wow. And so that's, I then put a deposit on it and went looking for the rest of the money. I remember going to a bank and asking them for a loan of $3,000, and they said, "And what is your profession, Mr. Thompson?" I said, "I'm an actor." And the man I was talking to said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but we don't lend money to actors." And so a friend of mine came up with some of the money, and it took me a couple of years to get the rest of it. Wow. And I apologised to the old man who had the property for sale. I said, "I'm sure you know that if you wanted a piece of land, you would hold on to them as well." And he said, "Yeah, fair enough." And so that was in 1970.
Wow. And
it
did
cost
you come...
$8,500
Oh my goodness.
for 300 acres and a little timber cottage, 2-room timber cottage.
And look at the prices we have now.
Oh, outrageous.
Outrageous.
Truly.
And so did you come down into Bellingen often, or was it your hideaway? Did you just hide out in the east of Dorrigo and...
I didn't come down into Bellingen much. Bellingen's quite a trip from
eastern Dorrigo.
Right, yeah.
What was it, 40 minutes?
Go to Dorrigo or Coffs Harbour.
Was it 40 minutes or longer?
About an hour's drive on a dirt road that winds like a serpent, and but it was mostly Coffs Harbour because that's where the airport is.
Yes.
And it truly became my base.
Right.
And so we lived there, but didn't spend ever more than about 12 weeks at the most.
Oh, wow.
Before going off to Sydney or Melbourne or wherever to make film or television.
So all that commotion in Bellingen with the hippies settling in and
came later.
And the community hall. Were you there for glimpses of that, or?
Yeah. Oh well, I was around, but
around,
I was never a part of.
Yes.
The alternates.
No.
And where my place is up in eastern Dorrigo, there was never really a sort of hippie or alternate scene.
No. It was rough and tough out there.
Yeah, well, it was rural. Rural and timber cutting, and but you know, I had a lot of friends in that scene.
Yes.
Folk singers, and I was a part of. There was a documentary made called "Give Trees a Chance" that Paul Tate and Jenny Kendall made, and I was just up there a couple of weeks ago for the 40th anniversary of that film, and it was instrumental in the premiere declaring a moratorium on the logging of old-growth forests and the establishment of a study, so it was the first of those, and that was all hippiedom, you know, that was wonderful.
Hippiedom.
Hippiedom.
Amazing. I'd like to jump across back to your films now. You've done so many classics, obviously. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, Man from Snowy River, High Ground, Oyster Farmer. The one film I'd like to ask you about specifically is Don't Tell. Because Don't Tell, to me, it slipped under the radar. To me, I feel, you know, when you look up Jack Thompson, it's not the top of the list, but I thought it was fabulous.
It's a fabulous movie.
I thought it was fabulous.
Isn't that great?
Why do you think it just...
I don't know. I don't think it was marketed properly. That's always a consideration. It won the Audience Award at the Newport Film Festival in America, and I went over there, and the young woman that it's about came to that festival. And she's now lives up on the North Coast, and she's a teacher living a highly successful life.
Wow.
with a loving husband and all of that. But she came along to that festival, and at the end of it, one of the festival organisers said, and she's here, I don't want to embarrass her, but if she felt she could stand up, she's here in the audience. She stood up, and the rest of the audience stood to their feet.
Oh,
it was a
beautiful.
Standing ovation. Wonderful.
What a beautiful
Yeah,
moment.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's peculiar because it came out in 2017,
Yeah.
which was the peak of that Me Too movement. You know,
Yeah.
Me Too going viral, all these women speaking out about abuse, and yeah, just watching that film and seeing it, such as a David and Goliath story. You know,
Yes.
this girl being told time and time again not to tell.
Yeah.
And she takes down this establishment. And your performance was amazing, and how you had to play a real character. And
Yeah. Well, I've had to play a real character quite a lot.
Yes.
And Myers, the solicitor, I asked to meet him so that I could get, not so that I could imitate him, but so I could get the spirit of the man. And as it turned out, I had met him about 6 months before, when a long-time friend of mine, Ron Finney, had his ashes scattered on Moreton Bay, and he was there, and Myers was there, because he and Ron had been part of the establishment of the first Indigenous legal service in Queensland. A lovely man. And so he's a really sort of white knight figure, knowing that he had the truth and the right on his side.
Yes.
And I loved that movie. And I don't immediately remember her name, but that's Cillian Wrong, the woman who directed it. Was
Tori Garrett.
Yes, Victoria,
Yeah.
Tori
Garrett. And you said that she was a brilliant director because she knew what she wanted from you guys.
Yes.
And she knew how to get it out.
Yes.
And I thought that was quite fascinating, because I wanted to ask you, from an actor's point of view, what do you want from a director? What would you like to add to that statement? Is there anything else?
What do you want from a director?
Yeah.
Well, ideally, they know how to elicit from you what it is they want, a particular spirit, a particular attitude, whatever. Oshima, who directed Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, I said to him, and as I've said to others, I'm an instrument in your orchestra. You tell me what it is you want. A high C with a vibrato, I'll give it to you as only I can. That's what I bring as an actor. You tell me what it is you want and I'll bring it to you.
Yes.
That's not my interpretation. That's why there's a director, you know?
Yes.
And he said, yes, and this is before we did the movie, a meeting over in Auckland. And I said, so, Mr. Oshima, what is it you want from me? And he said, I see 3 of your film. You're a very good actor. That's all I want.
Wow.
That's all I want.
Threw you into the abyss.
He did that with everyone. It was wonderful, but it's wonderful. That's all I want.
Yeah.
So directors are as different as people, and they all direct in very different ways. So I've worked with wonderful directors. Wonderful.
Amazing. I'd like to ask you about when the first time you're reading a script, because it can be the dialogue can seem so obscure, and you need to treat it with respect, as if you're pulling out the true meaning, as you said, you know, it's not you, it's what's trying to be said here. How do you make it alive? Can you tell me more about that process when you're reading dialogue for the first time?
Yeah, it goes back to my first year at Sydney High, and both Peter Thompson and I were awarded prizes, he for oratory and I for declamation. And Pat Thompson, who had some experience as an actress at the Independent Theatre in Sydney and at Patch Theatre in Perth, tutored me and said, don't think about the rhyme, don't think about the rhythm, that's already there in the structure. Think about what you're saying. What do you want to say? What are you saying here?
Yes.
So, from there on in, I suppose, what are you saying here? And I mean, you can make a joke of it. There are half a dozen different ways of saying something. But
how do you find that truth?
That comes from finding where the person lives, their internal environment. And it's very simple things to me sometimes. It's like, okay, what's the year? Right, so they're 30, so when were they born? Righto, so what were their paradigms? Who was their favourite movie star? What was their favourite music? What was the song that they liked most? Did they have friends at school? Who were these people? You create that world.
Yes.
And then that person from that world says those things.
Wow. It's like a line from one of your dad's poems, let me say how you would say it, or else
Or
they're
of no worth. Yeah, yes. Yes, it is.
That's
Yes.
absolutely brilliant. You said it was only when you did Star Wars was when you got the appreciation from your son's generation.
Definitely.
Which is my generation.
Yeah, yeah.
So I find that quite interesting. And I would
Well-
like to know, was that the only sci-fi film that you did, Star Wars? Or was there another one?
There's from Blue Future, Blue Heaven, Blue. That was shot here in Canberra. That was a sci-fi movie.
Right.
I find that.
Because you have an appreciation for this surreal...
I love sci-fi.
Yes, and this surrealist art and
Yeah,
all that.
yeah.
So do you wish you did some more sci-fi films?
Yeah, I'd love to. Oh,
Yeah.
is that an offer? Hey,
Let me
I
call
would
my-
love to. I would really love to. Yeah, it was the only opportunity. And when you think of that great pile of videos that you took out of the video store, there's apart from Man from Snowy River. That's right. When I did Star Wars, Bill's friends at school said, oh, your dad's an actor. What's he been in? Man from Snowy. Oh, yeah, my sister watches that all the time. And Star Wars, sick. And it was like you were suddenly a real actor. Right, fair.
Even if it was 3 minutes screen time.
Yeah, I know, 3 minutes screen time. Oh, and associated with the 3 minute screen time, there's a Lego. Lego makes all the Star Wars characters and their ships and vehicles and one thing like that. There is a Lego character of my, a Lego figure of my character, clear glass, and when you look it up on in the Google, it says rare. Rare. Well, not a very exciting figure to play with. No legs, right? No legs, and a hover chair. What are you? But it was a delight to make.
Yes.
And our son Bill just was in heaven, you can imagine, on the set in Tunisia.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
The reason I brought it up is because, I've only met you today, but you seem this really optimistic nature about you, there's sparkle in your eye. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's this whole sub-genre coming out of sci-fi now, and it's called dystopian futures. And, you know, you turn on Netflix and there's a heading saying dystopian futures with a whole catalogue of sci-fi, and I would like to see utopian futures.
Yeah.
You know, what's your thoughts?
I would like to see utopian futures.
Yeah, what's
too.
your thoughts on this?
But dystopian futures is not new.
No, but the availability.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a bit like the horror movies. It's like all of that. There's a thrill in it, of a particular kind. You know, turn on the news. There's not a lot of good news.
No, that's true. That's true.
So
that's true. But just as an entire, worthy of a genre, it just took me by surprise. I wonder what Jack thinks about this.
Yeah. Well, it is worthy of a genre, like Gothic.
Yes.
In literature, you know.
Interesting. All right, let's jump back to one of your movies. So, you've known Russell Crowe for a long time, since he was a child.
Yep.
You became mates, you stayed mates, and you played his father in the film Some of Us. But you invited him to spend 2 weeks up on that land in Dorrigo prior to get into the relationship of that role.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I paid for him and the director. There were two directors on that movie. One was the cinematographer, and the other was an American who had directed The Sum of Us as a play off Broadway. And I paid for he and Russell to come up to my farm. Russell came up first, and we spent a week together. We're going to play father and son. I wanted to develop that familiarity. It was already there, but not in the same way. And our son Bill was just a little boy at the time, and so he could see that relating to the boy and become a part of that. And we talked scenes of the movie, but then in the second week, the director came up and we went through every scene in the screenplay, and Russell argued every scene in the screenplay with the director. No, that wouldn't work. I mean, why don't we do it? Russell, I can assure you it worked off Broadway. This isn't Broadway, we're making a movie, blah, blah, blah. This went on, but it went on day after day after day, and at the end of it, all of that had been sorted out. So when, on a very tight schedule, it was shot in 5 weeks. When we went on the set, there was none of that. We knew what we were doing, going straight into it. Bang, 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 bang. The father-son relationship had been established. We knew what we were doing. It was just a delight. Wonderful.
You said that so many of the scenes were, you know, it was studied, but it was intuitive. It was like a tennis match.
Yeah.
And it was some of the best you'd done in your 30-year career at that point.
Yeah, it was. That was wonderful.
That's incredible.
Really wonderful. I think it's a brilliant play. And we initially had to sort out whether the asides to the audience would simply be voiceover.
Yes.
And that didn't work because it's like, why is he standing there not saying anything?
Yes.
And I can hear his voice. So you break the fourth wall and you look directly at the camera and say, it's just lovely in that way. Wonderful things like the scene where after Harry's had his stroke, and Russell's character, my son, has fixed up the wheelchair so the 2 rings of the bell and one, and he leaves me sitting there and walks out past the camera, and the camera remains on me, and you now know that I've lost my speech. I've lost my ability to communicate. And I look directly down the lens and I say, that's the trouble with having a stroke. They treat you like a fuckwit. It's just, It's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
Brilliant. Sort of across from the screen to the audience
Yes.
communication.
And it was a paradox because there was, you're searching eyes from this, from having a stroke. We're feeling this emotional turmoil, and all of a sudden it's a bit cheeky, and you break that.
That's right. Very clever.
Yes.
Very clever, and it is both tragic and courageous and exciting.
Yes.
And Stevens, who was in that interview with me, David Wenham interview, he said that he wrote that play for his father, who had treated his homosexuality as comfortable, and to all the men in Australia that he'd met and worked with who never had any problem with his homosexuality. Wow. And I think that's fabulously significant, considering the sort of reputation that we give ourselves of the poofter bashing and all of that. I wasn't ever there when I grew up, and yes, I was aware that it's a part of, but then it's also a part of our world to be equally savage with Indigenous people, with migrants, with whatever. It's the other that we fear and denigrate.
The minority.
But it was beautiful that worked so well. People came up to both Russell and I afterwards and said, thank you so much for making that movie. I was able to take my parents along.
Wow.
And I was at the airport, and there was an old guy and an elderly woman there, and he came up to me, and I thought he was going to say my child was gay, but he came up and said, I want to thank you so much for making that movie.
Yes.
Because people don't think that older people can fall in love.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Isn't that great?
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's great.
But also, aside from the homosexuality, just the father-son relationship was so important too.
Yeah.
So of that generation, you were embodying this feminine role, but with the Aussie bloke. So it was, it was showing how a father-son relationship can be loving as well and playful, and not just hard-nosed and get together, all that. There's so many layers in that film that were penetrating through.
It's beautiful, beautiful human document.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Really.
There was this one little cheeky scene where you were whisking the mashed potato and you're doing your exaggerated bum wiggle.
Yes.
Was that a throwback to Sunday Too Far Away?
Yes, because the other director is the cinematographer from Sunday Too Far Away. He created that moment. He said, just do this, and I go, yeah, right.
and you winked at the camera, I knew in that moment.
Yeah.
And that was amazing.
Yeah. Being able to work with the camera in that way
is
really extraordinary. It's like a bit more like television than film.
Yes, amazing. So now Russell Crowe, he's in the area as well, and he's building this incredible film studio in Coffs Harbour. What are your thoughts, since you've always been an advocate for Australian film? It must be.
I'm totally involved with the creation of that studio and with the teaching facility that will be a part of it, a Screen Academy. Wonderful.
Tell us more.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, it's a great site. I know the people involved. And
when will it be open?
It'll probably 2 or 3 years now.
Okay.
It won't be more than 2 years. They've had a lot of red tape to deal with, and trying to have the council or road department of main roads or whatever creating a sound wall, which they've done for other areas, but no, they're not necessary for here, but they have to have that. But that's happening, and
And what is Russell?
It'll be really exciting because you'll have a teaching facility there, making games, making animation, making film and television being taught. And when you need to see an example of this or the post-production associated with this, it will all be there. Come along and sit there. In Sydney, afters, alongside afters, there's the first ever purpose-built post-production facility. But the after students hardly ever get there because the post-production facility is hired by other people all the time. And we're not going to stop or allow a whole lot of students to come in where the meter's running, you know. But with an academy, a screen academy, as part of the studio, all of that will be integrated.
Yes.
It'll be really exciting.
Wow, powerful.
Fantastic.
So 2 or 3 years, you said.
Yep.
This brings me into my...
I'm ready to be there.
This brings me into my next fascination with you and how you love the concept of time and to toy with it in your mind. I love sitting here and watching you talk about the future and there's this twinkle in your eye. Share with me how you were saying off camera before, the anxieties that we put on ourselves with the restraint of time. You know?
You're running out of time.
Yeah.
How can you run out of time? I mean, how do you run out of time? Well, you can run out of time if you provide yourself with a very tight schedule. Yes. I understand all of that. The meter's running when you're making movies. But the understanding of time, apart from the meter, which is your watch or your cell phone, is very variable. I mean, it's a classic thing, you know, the time you're waiting for the rendezvous with your loved one goes very, very slowly. And, you know, the time to when you have to step out into the boxing ring goes very, very quickly. Bang, you're there. So it's a flexible thing, and there's a Buddhist tenet, you know, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. It's with our thoughts that we make this world. It's with our thoughts that we make time, because you can't see it. You can't really measure it. The clock doesn't measure the time we're talking about. It measures the amount of times we go around the sun. That's not my lifetime.
No.
That's not the time I have to talk with you. That's not the time we share. Yes. And I think
we're not here
time is a wonderful element that, as I said earlier, it's so much a part of our appreciation of life itself. When you run out of time, you run out of life itself. And I really feel more and more as the years go by that you should truly appreciate the time you have. If you do, it expands.
You have all the time in the world.
You have.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm going to kindly ask you to break the fourth wall another time and share a poem with us, whatever you like.
Well, I will share a poem that's been a favorite of mine for a long time. I'm a great fan of Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass. It's from Through the Looking Glass, and it's the book that she discovers on the other side and holds up to the mirror so that she can read it. It's the Jabberwocky. 'Twas a brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the moan raths outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that snatch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought, so rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burled as it came, 1, 2, 1, 2, and through his vorpal blade went stick-a-snack. When it was dead, he took its head, and came galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwocky? Oh, come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, frabjous day, calloo, callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe.
Thanks so much, Jack.
It's a lovely thing.